welcome to another edition of Motor Mouth. I'm Kendra.
I'm Dan.
And we're here, as always, at the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles. We're at 85 South Walnut Street in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. And we would love to hear from you all at home. You can contact us by giving us a call, 610-367-2090, or visiting our website, boyertownmuseum.org. You'll find all the staff's email addresses on there, whoever you want to talk to. We'd love to hear from you. The museum is open 7 days a week for visitors, 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. We are closed major holidays. And I want to give a special thank you to anyone out there who attended our second food truck fair back on June 25th. The truck stops here. We had one last year. It was very successful. We did it again this year, and we had just as good of a turnout as last year. So if you were there, thank you for coming and supporting the museum. I hope you got some good food. I know I did. Some really good tater tots.
I wasn't here.
You were here in spirit.
Yeah. I was visiting my parents.
You had a note. It was all right.
Yeah. Well, my mom made dinner.
Yeah, that was probably
good.
Pretty darn good.
It's probably, yeah.
Moms always make the best food.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mom.
So we had a great time, and if you came, thank you. If you didn't, stay tuned, because I'm sure we'll be doing it again next year, so we hope to see you then. We're going to have I say quiet month here at the museum, but really that's because we're gearing up for our next big event, which is going to be Duryea Day on Saturday, September 3rd from 9 to 4 at Boyertown Community Park. So we'd love to see you if you want to be a spectator, or if you have a car, truck, or motorcycle that you'd like to show at Duryea Day. We'd love to have you there too, and we'll be doing our regular roving reporter routine, right?
We could do that, yeah.
I've already got a couple people in mind I'd like to talk to, so.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to our camera guy about it.
Yeah,
see if he wants to show up. Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too hot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really the next big thing coming up here. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to you, Dan, and I think we're going to start off with our World War II segment this
World War
month.
II segment, yes. Yeah. I was wondering what to do, and I want, if you paid attention in the past when we talk about World War II, we're talking about pretty much home front stuff. You know, try to stay away from the combat material, and so it's home front and non-combative stuff, and there's a lot of interesting stories that went on in the U.S. And I also tried to get it where it's car related, because this is Motor Mouth and it's for cars and stuff. And so anyway, what I'm going to talk about is scrap drives today, and came across some interesting stuff thanks to the internet and National Archives, actually, some speeches and stuff. But anyway, they had scrap drives, and they were necessary for the war effort to, we needed the metal for tanks and guns and all that. And a lot of times you hear about the rubber and the paper and stuff, but we're just going to be talking about the metal today. I read somewhere, actually I quoted this off the web, and somebody wrote, communities melted down Civil War cannons and tore down wrought iron fences. So they were that, we're talking historical things they were melting down. But it says after that, sacrificing their history for their future. And I thought, what a noble cause, because you think the world is at war, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who were frightened, and they said, we have to win this. And sometimes I wonder if people think that way today, if they thinking about the whole country instead of just themselves. Anyway, that's a little soapbox type thing. So anyway, I have some pictures. You're going to be seeing them on your screen, and the first picture is a Save Scrap for Victory. They had posters all over the place. I think you can get reprints on the internet if you want. It'd be good, I think, to put up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of spruce the place up a little
And
bit.
another one is Salvage Scrap to Blast the Jap. And, you know, they were not politically correct, I guess. We were at war. And so anyway, there's a couple posters you're looking at. And I came across this, this letter to, I think it was to farmers. And it's from South Carolina. And it's dated January 13th, 1942. So we're talking a little more than a month after Pearl Harbor. And it says, our country for many months has urgently needed scrap iron and steel to speed our program of national defense. Since the attack on Pearl Harbor last month, this need has become increasingly urgent for all scrap iron and steel that can be had at this time. Farms are considered an important source of scrap iron and steel. And so 1 month plus a few days after Pearl Harbor, they were already talking about this. Franklin Roosevelt, the president back then, he had a statement. There was a statement he made in August of '42. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands is over here, and so FDR introduced her to the press corps, and then he said, we are engaged in an intensive drive to collect all the scrap possible. We need steel scrap badly to increase the present production. We're keeping ahead of the blast furnace now, but we want to accumulate 17 million tons of scrap to ensure steel production for the year 1943. So there are major stuff here, okay? And the Queen had nothing to do with this. She just happened to be there, and I threw her name out, okay?
Name dropping.
Yeah, name dropping. And then I came across, and you'll see it on your screen, a brochure online. It's called Get in the Scrap, a plan for the organization of the school children of America in the National Salvage Program. This is October '42. And they had this whole program, and you read the first page, and there's another message from Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he goes, it's a letter to Americans. The boys and girls of America can perform great patriotic service for their country by helping our national salvage effort. Millions of young Americans turning their energies to collecting all sorts of scrap metals, rubbers, and rags can help the tide in our ever-increasing war effort. They will earn the gratitude of every one of our fighting men by helping to get them the weapons they need now. I know they will do their part. And it was this whole pamphlet on how to get the children interested and what to do it, and there's talks from all different people and stuff. Kind of interesting. Next picture you're going to see there is a group of junior commandos, which I understand is a part of the Boy Scouts of America, and it shows them collecting scrap, and you know there's some kids there and a pile of scrap. Kind of looks like my apartment, actually. Anyway, so there you go. There's one, and then if you go to the next picture, you're looking at the next picture. It shows a car up on its side, and they're cutting it up for scrap metal. And then the next one is license plate, and there's a whole pile of license plate there. And I noticed among those license plate are consecutive numbers. So I don't know if they stole them off of cars or where they came from. But, you know, again, this is just the war effort, scrap metal, all cases. Next picture, auto salvage yard, and there's just piles of cars all over. If you look to the lower left corner, it shows a bunch of hoods from cars. And upper left corner on the little mezzanine thing, there's a bunch of fenders, and I think there's more hoods there. So, you know, there's a lot of that going on. And then the last picture is, this looks like a scrap collection. Who knows, by a bunch of youngsters and people in the town collecting. You see some car parts in there, see some engine blocks right there at the base of the picture there. And very interesting. So when you go to the car shows and you're wondering, whatever happened to all those old cars? And we're going to touch on that a little bit with our guest. Whatever happened to all those old cars? Well, a lot of them got melted down that we could save our country.
Yeah.
And you know, we have cars in our collection here. There's only a handful of around the country, and who knows how many they made of some of these, but there you go. And so Kentucky Governor Keene Johnson, October 2nd, 1942, says, "Steel cannot be made without scrap. It is impossible to make steel without scrap iron as it is to make biscuits without flour or to make ice cream soda without ice cream." Ooh. And with that, I'm done. I'm ready for an ice cream soda right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, that made me hungry.
Yeah, it's kind of warm in here.
You know, I do wonder how some of these cars even survived all this, but
and there was a gentleman, and I tried finding it, and I could not find it. I want to say either Chicago or Detroit, and I believe his name was Pollock, and he collected a bunch of cars. I think he had scrap iron and coal business and stuff. He'd get all these cars, and he stored them like nose down in these barns, and he saved hundreds and hundreds, and some really valuable one. And I've seen picture of like a Daniels that he saved, and so, you know, and I think a lot of these cars you can thank him for saving them. So,
well, that's our World War II segment. Thank you. Good. We're going to move out into the gallery now and take a closer look at one of our cars and also learn about a local, well, a Pennsylvania manufacturer. So we'll meet you out in the gallery.
Okay.
All right, well, we've moved out here to the gallery.
And I'm going to interrupt you right here, because we found out who the guy is that saves all the cars nose first. And it's Barney Pollard, and our special guest here told us all about it.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry.
It was a... I attribute it to the fact that we're so close to Pottstown with Pollock, that the Pollock instead of the Pollard just got in your brain.
We had some of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Now
I've lost my place. Now
we're out here.
We're out here in the gallery with the newest addition to our collection, a Pullman car, which was built in York. And we have with us our guest today, Paul Vaughn, who restored this car, and I would call you a Pullman expert, if that's okay with you. You seem to know quite a bit about this company. So Dan and I are going to kind of pick your brain here about the company and also this car in particular. So first of all, Pullman out of York, when was it founded? What years are we talking about with Pullman cars?
1903 was the beginning. Slow beginning. A gentleman from Lancaster County who made his way through various jobs to York, where he built his business building steam heating units. His name was Albert Brummel. A bit of an inventor, sort of a garage mechanic inventor on the side from his business dealings, which were very successful. So he had the time and the money, and unfortunately he had lost his wife, his first wife, so he probably had a little more time than normal. And he had some great ideas. He developed an engine that became the basis of the Pullman automobiles and put it in a car that he conceived of. And we don't have an example of that other than we have two photographs, different angles of it. They built this one only, built it in his factory building where he was making his steam heating units.
And I gotta say, there's something slightly different about that vehicle than most other vehicles we see on the road back then or now even.
A lot different. Of course, it had 6 wheels.
Yes.
And first of all, let's get to the name. I can only make a supposition that Mr. Brummel was not too much of an egomaniac. He didn't feel he needed to hang his name on the front of that car. Maybe he felt Brummel wasn't an appropriate name for an automobile. But when he came up with the concept of 6 wheels to propel his new automobile design, he went to a well-established name in transportation, and I brought a little model along to show. By 1900, George Mortimer Pullman's company, building railroad cars, was at the pinnacle. Pullman cars were just known for luxurious travel. If you went anywhere, you went by train, any great distance. And by 1900, the railroad cars, the palace cars, had 6-wheel trucks on either end of a long wheel-based train. That provided for a very comfortable ride. So Brummel borrowed the name. Back in those days, I understand, I don't know law that well, but I understand that there weren't the efforts to deal with trademarks and things like that, so it was a form of flattery.
Yeah.
And the Pullman car got its name from the train, but is not related to the train company in any way.
I'm sure
I'll take a moment to mention, I asked some of the other Pullman owners what they would like me to say today. And one thing we all agree on is that whenever we take our cars to a car event of any kind, a show or a tour, we are inevitably asked the question, is it part of the train company? That's the first question it seems everyone asks. And we actually get very tired of answering it.
Sure.
But it's not in any way other than the fact that the name was borrowed from the railroad company. It was already a proven, accepted name, and it was easy by association. He hoped his car would be as successful.
And I can understand people asking because, you know, a lot of people heard of the Pullman railroad car.
Yeah, still.
When
This isn't too well known.
if you go to any of the historic railroads, you'll generally find a few of them with the word Pullman right on the cars.
Yeah, I mean, we still associate that with luxury, I think.
So the problem was the car was a complete failure.
That's
He
why
was
you're not
embarrassed greatly by it. Some of the engineering was a little too far out. The center wheels were drive wheels, and it had a rigid frame. So if you hit a gully, your center wheels would sit there and spin, and you couldn't go. So you had to get out and push the car to get off the dip in the ground. Or if you hit a rise, you had this seesawing effect, which made it very hard to control. And if you notice there's no steering wheel, it had a tiller. Now, it wasn't a small car.
No.
They were 26-inch wheels with 34-inch tires on them. Not very wide, 4-inch wide tires, but it was a big car, very heavy. And steering that with a tiller would have been difficult, but what made it even worse was it didn't have spindles on the axle like a conventional automobile does. When you turn the wheels turn. The axle stays straight. This was set up like a wagon. It had no spindles. When you turned that tiller, the whole axle pivoted from a pivot point underneath the car. But so did the back in the opposite direction, which would allow the car to turn on a very, very, very tight radius.
Right.
So tight that if you threw that tiller when you were going 30 miles an hour before seatbelts, you were no longer in the car.
My goodness.
And that's how the first automobile accident occurred in York, Pennsylvania, which was written up extensively by the York newspaper. I think you can still find it online.
Really?
First
That's
automobile
great.
accident.
You said 30 miles an hour. Was that car capable of that?
Oh,
speed?
yes, yes.
Really?
Yeah, if you could find a piece of road smooth enough to do it.
Right.
That was,
It
again, in
normally
03.
wouldn't.
In 03, you would,
Right.
there weren't many smooth roads. So they did try a couple trips in it. They tried to get to Philadelphia, only made it to Gap Hill where they couldn't get up the hill.
Okay.
And a couple of men were along, and they had a picnic lunch and then turned around and went back to York. As I mentioned earlier, if you notice in any early photograph of automobiles, the tires are white. Rubber is naturally white, not black yet. That took a few more years to figure out how to make rubber black without breaking it down. but they were also smooth. They didn't have any tread on them yet. Tread only came along, this was '03, about 10 years later. Tread started to appear on tires. So they're just smooth white tires. They were pretty poor quality too.
Right.
And you got to remember, this is the day of the horse and buggy. And there were a lot of thrown shoes with nails sticking up. So flat tires were the biggest problem of all early motorists, no matter what automobile you drove. And they spent a great deal of time changing flat tires.
Yeah. Now you got 2 more to change, so.
Yeah, a lot of tires. So it was a failure. He felt that it needed a complete makeover, so they took it back to the factory, tore it apart. That's one account. There are other accounts that the vehicle did survive, but we've never had.
And he only built this one?
Only one.
Correct? Okay.
Only the prototype. They refashioned it as a conventional 4-wheel automobile with a steering wheel this time, and renamed it the York. And they set about building 20 of them. They too were full of all kinds of mechanical flaws. The suspension, or the frame itself was too weak, and they tend to sag, and when they sagged, the whole driveline got out of whack, and they just were constantly fixing the ones that they had built before they even got to sell them. But the name Pullman had already caught on because they had done some advertising to try to sell these things. And people were asking for Pullmans, not Yorks. So we understand, and there's a number of stories out there, but we understand that only one ever left the factory called a York. The other 19 were renamed Pullman. So they changed the plates on them and sent them out the door as Pullmans.
And again, that was a pretty conventional car.
Conventional to a point, but still experimental.
Right.
Not very well engineered. So at this point, there were 2 men involved. Sam Bailey, who was a carriage maker from Lancaster, who was now quite old, living in Philadelphia with a second wife. He had 2, lost his first wife. He was living in Philadelphia, managing his business ventures. He had carriage works in York, Lancaster, and I believe some in Boston and Philadelphia. So he was more or less, let's say, senior stockholder in the company.
Yeah.
He was the money
a
man.
figurehead, maybe.
And his contribution to the Pullman Motor Car Company, which started out being called the York Motor Car Company. In 1909, they changed the name to Pullman Motor Car Company, even though they built the Pullman automobile. There were a lot of companies like that. The company had one name, the car was named something else. But Sam Bailey supplied one of his carriage works in York. He may have had vision enough to realize that the automobile was going to be some serious competition for carriages. Maybe his sales were already starting to drop off. So he put up a building, and Brummel put up the ideas. He had the prototype car, he had the engine. That was the strong suit. Brummel's mechanical abilities were really highlighted in his engine design. Unique. I've never seen another early automobile with a conventional design like Brummel's. It was a internal combustion engine. It was a 4-cylinder, known as a T-head because of the shape of the cylinders. The cylinders in the middle, and then they came up and flared out on either side. You had exhaust valves on one side and intake valves on the other. So the cylinder was in the shape of a T, called a T-head engine. What made his car unique was that instead of being individual jugs, as they're called on early automobiles, set in a row, connected with tubing up top and down below for water, for a water-cooled engine, not an air-cooled, he felt that the engine would be stronger if you left the sides of the jugs open, flanged them, and bolted them together, forming one block. Now, this is early technology. A mono block was not possible yet. There weren't, in 1903, I don't believe there was anybody building a single block engine. And your blocks were bolted onto a crankcase, so that they were separate parts. Again, a complete, unique, fully cast engine was well into the future yet, maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
So to make this whole assembled engine stronger, he felt that if those jugs were bolted together with that open ends, forming one continuous water jacket, and then you just put a plate on either end, one for water going in from the radiator, one coming out the back that's hot, coming around to a water pump, and then going back into the radiator to be cooled. That was no, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. Comes out of the radiator at the bottom, cool, goes around, drops down through the radiator. But the cooling process was less likely to leak. You had fewer pipes and so forth mounted on the top of the engine. It was smoother design, much stronger, and unique to Pullman's. Used up through 1912, I believe, on their engine designs. So Brummel's engine was the secret to his success, the strength of his inventiveness, and that was his contribution. But they needed an engineer. There were two fellas, Sam Bailey,
Yep.
Albert Brummel. They needed an engineer. They found him in Harrisburg. James Klein, Jimmy Klein. He was a young fella, pioneer in automobile sales, ran a bicycle shop, started to sell cars, would take them apart, see how they worked. So he was an engineer, self-taught, but he was an engineer. They brought him on board. Now, I recall, or in some of my earlier studies on the company, there was 100 original shares of stock in the company. Brummel held 40, Bailey held 40, and they gave Jimmy Klein 20 to run the company.
Yeah.
He was the man who was shop foreman, chief engineer.
So-
he did it all.
So what year are we talking about now,
This is-
roughly?
Early 5.
Okay,
05.
so the company is in existence 2 years.
2 years.
They start off by the six-wheeler.
Yep.
And now they're
Moved to the
more
York.
conventional.
Moved to the York, which really didn't do
Right,
much.
20 of them.
So now they're ready to go into production.
That's it. So,
Model C.
Model C.
Their first model was a Model C. We can only assume that they considered the six-wheeler the Model A, and the York the Model B.
Yep.
But the first production model was the Model C, and it proved pretty successful. There is an example of it that still exists. It's in a museum in York, and it is primitive. It has metal brake bands on metal drums. It has the clutch has no lining. It's all metal. I mean, it's primitive. But it was the
It's their
beginning.
first model.
It
Yeah.
was the beginning.
So Model C, was that successful? Like
Fairly.
They make
Maybe 100,
millions?
150.
Okay.
These were handcrafted cars built in the factory. They built the bodies. They did everything. They had their own foundry in York.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because you were talking about the engineering behind the engine and stuff. And, back then, a lot of times these small companies
Bought.
they bought
Bought
stuff.
parts.
Yeah.
But you said,
Well, as best I
making
can
their
tell,
own.
they bought axles. They bought the axles, but they built the driveline. They built their own transmission, their own engine. They bought the radiators. That was a purchased item, as well as the lights on almost every car. I
Sure.
mean, Henry Ford was probably the only gentleman making his own radiators and headlights and everything. And even then, I'm not sure he made his own lights until later on. The early brass lights were probably made by specific light companies.
Yeah.
so
they're
now
in-
cranking out
They're in
cars.
production, yes, but we don't know totally the history that occurred in those 1905 to 1909, other than Brummel seemed to ease himself out of the company, and I believe he was bought out, but he would occasionally show up, walk through the factory. By 1909, 1910, they had several hundred employees. I've heard
Wow.
numbers as high as 700 employees.
Wow.
Building the bodies and everything right in the factory.
So with that many, we're putting out hundreds of cars a year?
Yeah,
or-
now we're up to a couple thousand
Okay.
Amazing.
a year.
At the peak.
But after Brummel eased himself out of the company, or maybe they eased him out, he was marrying. He married again, had a much younger bride, and probably had other interests with his business, with his heating plant business. So,
Oh, so he still kept that other.
oh yes, that was going full strength
okay.
in a different location.
Okay.
So
Torn in a lot of directions.
Bailey and Brummel were not managing the business directly. It was Jimmy
Okay.
Klein that was running the show. And there was a financial panic. I've read and recall 1908, I believe. The country experienced a recession. I don't know how serious it was, but money may have been tight. Bailey and Klein exited the company as well in 1909. Oh, someone asked me earlier about the success of the company. What did they do? How did they grow? We didn't have the marketing we have today.
Yeah.
They did a lot with print in form of advertisements. That one over there, if you want to, the one over by the post. They did advertising. They printed elaborate.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, that's.
There was a lot of work went into that.
And that was a Sunday newspaper ad, full page, full color, 1909. So they spent a lot of money, and that was a particular dealership that did that, selling Pullmans in New York City. And they spent a lot of time doing their
Brochures.
Yeah, brochures or sales pieces that were very elaborate, embossed. This was special. This was 10 years later. This was their first 10 years in business. That was a 10th anniversary. But they didn't have the radio and television we have today for advertising automobiles like we hear all the time. So to gain recognition, racing was the ticket, and a lot of companies went that way. Pullman was no different. Jimmy Klein was obsessed with racing, really obsessed with racing. He loved it. And the minute he and Bailey sold the Pullman dealership, I can't say they sold it. They were bought out. They needed money to keep the company going. They needed working capital. And to get that capital, they had to bring in some New York investors, and they wanted to run the company. So they took over and eased Bailey and Klein out the door, who immediately started another company in New York, BCK, Bailey, Carroll, and Klein. They got another money man involved, and they formed a company. They operated in New York till 1912, and then they were lured away by Richmond, Virginia. Richmond wanted industry, and Jimmy Klein saw an opportunity. You know, there were a lot of advantages to moving there. They made it easy on him, I guess, with land and loans and so forth. So he built a big company down there that existed until 1922 and continued racing. One of Jimmy Klein's race cars, you'll still see pictures of it out in the internet, Jimmy Jr. still exists. He built two race cars, Jimmy and Jimmy Jr. They actually raced at the York Fairgrounds when they were still in York until 1912. They were very successful. Jimmy Jr. was a very successful race car. The original engine was changed out to a Duesenberg engine, and it raced clear up through the teens. Had a successful racing campaign.
Now we're progressing in time here, and I'm curious. You know, this car here, right here, and you had a lot to do with this vehicle here, which is now part of the museum's collection. And this is a what year? What
1915.
Model? 15 model. So they made cars up to what year again?
17 was the
17,
last year.
Okay. And
the company had great success through 1910. 1911, they were still selling cars strong, but the industry was changing.
Right.
There was a horsepower rush that took place. Everybody wanted more horsepower. And these new investors from New York didn't want to spend the money to do the product development to improve the engines. So they took a shortcut. They bored the cylinder walls to increase the piston size and weakened the engines. And they sold thousands of defective automobiles that ruined the name.
was there a recall, or
in those days there wasn't. There was just bad press and dissatisfied customers. I plotted the survivors. The company built in the course of its 14-year run, the first 2 years not being much. So in 12 years, they built over 23,000 automobiles. They had a large workforce. It was a important part of York's financial backbone.
So,
But-
how many are left now?
Well, with that engine crisis, when the cars were defective, sales plummeted, the company virtually went into receivership, but was quickly bailed out by local York residents because of all the employees
Wow.
that were involved. So now we had basically a community involvement, and the company was restructured in 1914, and they designed a car that they felt could compete in the mid price range. Not against Ford's Model T like we have over there. They were, what, $400, $500 cars.
Right.
This sold new for $740, but that you still cranked. This had a starter.
Yeah,
So-
because before they were doing more luxury type cars.
Oh yes,
right.
yeah. Well, they had a lower price range, but it still was much above that.
Right, right.
Yeah. I think around $1,600 was their cheapest of the brass era cars
Okay.
up through 14. So, so they restructured and they started building these. They started mass producing these. I mean, half of the production, 12,000 of the cars built by Pullman were built 15, 16, and 17 as this model. Now, it developed over those 3 years. It grew. This one is a 110-inch wheelbase. By 17, it had grown to a 114-inch wheelbase. It got a little wider. Now, it didn't. The wheel stayed the same, the track stayed the same, but the body increased in width by 2 inches.
Okay.
And it grew in height a little bit, so that it was a little bit more roomy inside. They found the 15 models were a little small.
Okay, now I'm going to steer you back here again. How many cars overall they made? 20?
About 23,000.
23,000, and how many are?
27 survive that we know of.
Wow.
23,000 to
27 survivors.
We were talking earlier about the scrap drives during World War II, and maybe even during World War I back then. They maybe.
Not too many,
Really?
not too much. Our involvement in World War I was a little limited. We
Yeah.
got in late.
But anyway, that's probably why you don't see many.
Well,
but
and
if there was 20,
having restored these, a number of them, and a number of early cars, I'll tell you that until 1930, almost all automobiles were wooden skeletons
right,
with metal nailed over the skeletons.
right.
And when the wood went bad,
Rot and
you didn't, I mean, was a lot of work to replace the wood. And
Okay.
you really couldn't do it effectively because of the way the cars were built.
Another thing, and you mentioned this earlier, that Pullman Company made pretty much everything you see here.
Oh, in the early years,
The,
yes.
the engines, the chassis, the body, and everything. But
by-
you said certain parts of this was made by another company in York as the hood, right?
Yeah, well,
And,
yeah,
and that name of that company is
York corrugating.
York Corrugated.
was,
And
yeah.
the reason I bring this up is Boyertown Body, which we're standing in the building of the truck body company, one of their vendors was York Corrugating that made the sheet metal for the trucks. Certain parts of the trucks here in the 50s and 40s.
They made hoods and fenders for the Pullman automobiles. And they were still in business when I was restoring a
Right.
Pullman 15 years ago. And they were kind enough to get out of their musty, dusty inventory the old dies that were used to stamp the hoods. And I had a bunch of hoods made up at that time that were used on some of the restorations. It's hard to find somebody that'll punch louvers that big. There's a lot of outfits out there making louvers because it's very popular in street riding,
Right,
but they're much smaller.
correct.
And to get a large louver, you have to have the dies. And they still had the original dies that were used to make. And when I was doing it, I had to make fenders for the one car. It's in York now. It's known as the Harley Davidson Pullman. It's a pickup, or it's a delivery van
Right.
with the Harley logo on the side. And those fenders I made in the factory at York Corrugating on the very equipment that the original fenders were made. That was quite a thrill for me
Oh,
to
that's
be able to
neat.
do that.
Yeah.
So, but back to these cars, the survivors. There are 4 1915s that have survived. 3 of them are touring cars, and then this one, which is a speedster. Now, they didn't offer a speedster in 1915. Last year they built a Speedster was 1914. But working from those designs, I reproduced a 1915 Speedster. Everybody in the hobby, sooner or later, in these early cars, wants a Speedster. They are the most fun vehicle to drive. Many, many, many Model Ts were converted to Speedsters. There were even companies making bodies that you could buy aftermarket to take a touring car and throw the body away and make a Speedster. What was able to happen with this one was there were so many parts missing for this car when I found it that the best thing for it was to build something that would be fun and useful. So we crafted the Speedster body for it, and the parts that were left freed up enough parts to complete 2 of the other 15s. So pieces like spare tire brackets and windshields and stuff were able to go on those other cars and made them all finished up. So I've been studying Pullmans for a long time.
Oh yeah. So real brief, why did Pullman go out of business?
Again, too much faith was placed in a gentleman that was brought in from outside the community to help market the cars this time. Not so much run the factory, but market the cars. And they placed so much confidence in this fella, and he completely hoodwinked them. He cranked up production, promised he could sell the cars, and had them rolling cars out the door. I think they were making like, 50 cars a day or something, 30 some cars a day. Cars were piling up, and they were shipping them, and they were being stored in warehouses. They weren't being sold. The deal they cut with this gentleman was he was paid per car.
Okay.
Made, not sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the time the money men behind the company saw what was happening, it was too late. And the country was going through, we were entering World War I. Production was being halted on commercial automobiles, and there was a shift, not as great as it was in World War II, but there was a shift towards military production. And Pullman didn't get any contracts to do any of that work, and they were in such bad shape financially. In 1917, there were only about 500 cars put together, probably under some pretty low morale situations.
Yeah.
And there's one surviving 17.
Okay. Now I notice we have 3 minutes left, maybe 3.5.
Yeah.
So what got you interested in Pullmans? I mean,
Well,
you're way, way too young to remember these being built.
I do like to dress up and tell people I bought them new, but they don't buy that too quickly. But bit of an interesting story. My mother was from Lancaster, her family. My father's from York, his family. Well, they settled after World War II in Lancaster.
Okay.
But that required a trip once a month to York to have dinner with my grandparents out on West Market Street. My grandmother's favorite dish that my father loved was hog maw. In Lancaster, we call it pig stomach, but in York, they called it hog maw. It's a wonderful meal, wonderful meal. I learned to like it from little up. But every time we made that trip across the old Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge in my dad's 49 Chevy, I was just a little kid, he made it a point to drive past the building that sits in downtown York that was the Pullman factory. And he'd always point it out. Now, up on the side of the building that you could see clearly on rainy days because the bricks would get damp, there was an old painted 4 stories up, full-size billboard of what I learned later to be a 1908 Pullman automobile. So from little up, all I ever heard about was these wonderful Pullman automobiles that were built in New York. So I developed this amazing desire to own Pullmans, and it just never left me.
Wow.
So
I'm glad.
Well,
I mean, this is neat.
it's been a lifetime of study though too, and I've because when you couldn't buy one, you studied them.
Sure.
Well, you know what's interesting talking about study, and I'm guessing at this. Remember when you were in school, studying was like a bad word? It was for me.
I'm a teacher.
But now, you know, I'm studying, you know, stuff like this.
Yeah.
It's like, it's fun.
If you can,
So if any of my old teachers are listening or watching,
You turned out okay.
yeah,
I try to, occasionally you find out that one of the kids now I haven't taught since 1976, to give you an idea how long ago that was. I left teaching and went into business. I'm going back this fall. I'll be substitute teaching again this fall, 40 years after the fact. I'm not a dinosaur, I'm a fossil.
oh, okay.
But I still bump into some students that I had back in the early days who developed an interest in the hobby through the little lectures that I'd throw into I was a shop teacher, so it was
Okay,
interesting.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I got to throw in some insights into the hobby. I even offered a bounty. I told the kids, you know, $50 to anybody can bring me the evidence that there's a Pullman in a barn somewhere. Because I taught in a couple school districts in Lancaster County.
Right.
And one day a kid came in and says, there's 2 of them in the barn. And I could not believe he told me that. I thought he was making it up. And sure enough, there were.
Wow.
There were 2 of them in a barn.
Oh my God.
And they're still there. I won't tell you where it is. But we could never buy them. But, so,
Okay. Good. Well, thank you.
you bet.
Yeah,
All
there's
right.
there's so much more because you were
Oh.
talking to us before we filmed,
Yeah,
and
did-
I
well,
know
I-
we had volunteers and staff huddling around hearing stuff.
Got a
And
minute or 2 left, quick. Maybe you can get a close-up of these later. One of the neatest things when we show Pullmans, when we take a car to a show, somebody will come up and they'll say, you know, my dad used to work for the company, or my grandfather. Well, that's what happened in 2 occasions. In Willow Street, where my home is, showing the Pullmans, 2 different gentlemen, 2 different years. One fellow was in a wheelchair who was a resident at Willow Valley's retirement village. Another was a local resident. In the case of the fellow who was the local resident, his dad worked for the company and was a test driver. And these are 1916 Pullmans
Wow.
that he was on the crew, and his dad's one of the guys sitting here. They test drove the Pullmans before they left the factory, before they were sent to be sold. So he gave me those photographs,
Oh, how
which
cool.
was so neat. And then
Oh,
the other
yeah.
gentleman, his father was a photographer, and his mother was, there's another pile. She was his assistant, who became his wife. And these are pictures of a 1917, the last year of production, Roadster Pullman. And the one is such a stage picture with apples sitting in a
really.
case. But he gave me all those photos. So that was a real treat to have those things happen when people will come up and share that with you. That just makes collecting all this stuff
And
worthwhile.
We have that happen here. You
I'll
know,
bet.
People come in and see a car and they say, oh, well, you know, my grandfather did this or whatever, and it's just really neat. And they're as excited as we are.
Yep.
So.
gives it a little more personal story to it.
When we did the 100th anniversary of Pullman, we had a picture that was taken in 1916, one of those panoramic
Yep.
of all the employees. So
Yes.
this is massive group of people. It was a picnic, I guess. We had that hanging in the museum over in York for the 100th anniversary we had in 2003. And through that, we were able to identify like 50 people in the picture from relatives who came into the museum and said, that's Grandpa right there. You know, and that was really nice.
Yeah.
So we got to identify a lot of the names. So that hangs in my office now, that picture.
Well, thank you for coming out here. Come to the museum, check out our Pullman, and you mentioned
And
the
I hope-
museum is too in York. It's the York.
Oh, it's part of the York
Trust.
County Heritage Trust is,
Yes.
is the big tent. The Agricultural and Industrial Museum on Princess Street is where the cars are
Yes,
located,
they
along with a
have-
lot of other large items.
They have some Pullmans.
But
as
I do
well.
hope to see you driving this in some of the events one of these days. My wife put a lot of miles in this car. There are pictures of her driving it on a number of tours. There's pictures, and there's seat belts with this when they're under the seat on the left side.
Yes, we have a
And
safety
that's
modification.
for the grandkids.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's some great pictures of grandkids in this thing.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
you bet. Enjoyed it.
You know, they said I'm supposed to drive this, but I feel like I'm reclining here. This is
Yeah.
comfy.
Can you see over the steering wheel?
Not really.
Okay.
I think I need a phone book underneath.
Kids. So.
All right, so we have something totally non-Pullman and World War II related, I think. to
No,
wrap up,
you're
don't
right.
we?
You're right.
Okay.
But these are nice, comfortable seats, so
Yeah,
we're doing this. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to be talking for the next few minutes here about an interesting vehicle that was made in 1969 by Diamond Rio. Diamond Rio Truck Company, right?
Right.
Okay. And real quick, Diamond T was a truck company. Started out making cars back in 1905. It was founded in Chicago by a guy named C.A. Tilt, T-I-L-T. And so the T from Tilt was used in Diamond logo and everything.
There you
Anyway, they made trucks. They made a lot of trucks. Were known for their trucks. All the way up to 1967, they were bought out by White Motor Company, White Trucks. Okay. And then I mentioned right in the beginning, Diamond Rio. And the Rio part of it, again, Rio was started by the guy who started Oldsmobile. He started a second company called Rio. That was in 1905. They made cars and trucks up into the 30s, and then from then on, they just made trucks. In 1960, oh boy, where's my notes here? Okay, 1957, Rio became part of White Motor Company. So now we had Diamond T and Rio both together under the White banner. 1967, everything was changed and they were called Diamond Rios. Actually, I found out that Diamond Rio name was, not the name, but the rights to the whole company was bought by a couple guys, Loyal Osterlin and Ray Housefield. And they were building trucks in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I didn't know that.
Really?
But anyway, Volvo later took over White and currently owns the rights to the Rio brand name. Okay, the truck I'm going to talk about is the Trend. It was started in 1967. They actually had a plastic cab, not a fiberglass, but it was plastic. It was called Royal X. And Royal X was like 2 sheets of hard plastic with like a foam inside to it. And they were very flexible and so on and so forth. And they made truck cabs. They were light. Best known for making canoes, actually. So
What year was this?
1967.
Okay.
Okay. So that was Royal X. And whoever thought of this, you know who thought of Royal X?
Who?
No, you don't know. I'll tell you.
Tell me.
U.S. Rubber Company. Okay. U.S. Rubber Company, same people who made Uniroyal tires. Now, do you remember Uni, Roy, and Al?
Oh, them guys, yeah.
TV commercial. They for the tires, they were a stunt team. Anyway, that's a free thing. Okay. Anyway, in 1969, this company made a truck and this Trend thing, and it was called a country wagon. And if you look at the first picture there, and I'm trying to find where my first picture is among my notes. There we are. You can see a truck and has just a box on the back, and you look at picture number 2, it was basically the same box, but it was like a stake bed, flatbed truck.
Really basic stuff.
Very basic. Look at picture 3, you see the truck with that same stake bed, but it's only half on the truck. There's jacks, you could jack it up a little bit, you drive the truck out from underneath it. Look at picture 4, same truck again, but they're installing a camper on the back. And picture 5 shows it all installed there, sitting there. I saw one of these trucks at the York truck show last summer. And as far as I know, it's the only one in existence. It's called, again, it's the country wagon, and it's a camper that you could buy, and it was made for maybe the farmer and who liked to go on vacation. So you take the farm truck off and put this camper on. It was a great idea. They made only like 24 of them though, so it didn't really go. I'll quote something here. The Diamond Rio camper sold like a concrete balloon. Each dealer was forced to take 1 or 2, and they had great difficulty selling them. The idea was to use the camper on weekends and switch the camper off and put on a flatbed, or camper off and put a flatbed on the truck for use during the week. problem is they were very expensive, and the bodies were not easy to change over. Takes careful alignment and patience. But anyway, so there you go. You have this camper came with a 20-foot house trailer body, completely furnished. Wow. Rich wood grain, vinyl coated paneling, vinyl ceiling, attractive fabric covered dinette, 2 gaucho lounges. What's a gaucho lounge?
Gaucho's a cowboy.
Native cowboy of South American pampas. I don't know what that has to do with
I'm not sure.
lounges. Anyway,
I didn't know cowboys have their own lounges.
you can convert them into comfortable beds, color coordinated drapes, 3-burner gas stove. You had a gas electric refrigerator, stainless steel sink, automatic hot water, bathroom area, on and on and on. Air conditioner is optional. You could also get an option with the 22-foot one, an office. You can have it changed into an office like you would use at a construction site or something.
Wow.
And so that was kind of interesting. I saw that, and I did some investigations. So the Trend Country wagon from Diamond Rio, and
so there's still one floating around, huh?
There's still one floating around, and we've been talking about a recreational vehicle display here at the museum. The guy who owns this one lives in Pennsylvania, so
he might be getting a phone call from us.
We might be. I tried finding more information about him.
Gotta hunt him down. Maybe he watches the show.
Maybe. So if you're
call
watching,
us.
call us. Okay. Anyway, we got like a minute left.
Oh man, I guess we better say goodbye then.
Bye.
All right. See you next one.
Okay. Thanks for watching.